The galaxy had long known the supremacy of its interstellar empires. Planets with sprawling cities, incomprehensible technologies, and civilizations that stretched back millennia. These were the true powers in the universe. Earth, a tiny speck in the cosmos, was nothing more than a footnote. The species that called it home were regarded as primitive, struggling against their own limitations. They were a scattered, fractured collection of nations, locked in constant conflict, their technology outdated compared to the wonders of the stars. Yet, unbeknownst to the aliens, Earth had always nurtured a fire deep within its people. Though they had yet to master the secrets of the universe, humanity possessed something the galaxy's grandest civilizations had long since lost: resilience. The kind of resilience that came not from technology or military might, but from an undying drive to survive, adapt, and evolve. For the Virelian Empire, this was irrelevant. Captain Xerax had known nothing but triumph in his military career. He had crushed civilizations far more advanced than Earth, and now he had come for this insignificant world, bringing with him a fleet of warships and a small army of scouts. Their mission was simple: assess Earth's resources, subjugate the population, and extract whatever was valuable before raising the planet for the Empire's expansion. Xerax stood aboard the bridge of his flagship, the Morenos, watching Earth through the reinforced glass of the observation deck. The planet's oceans glistened, its vast continents sprawling beneath a blanket of clouds. From this distance, it looked beautiful, almost innocent. But Xerax's mind was focused on the task ahead. He wasn't here for beauty. He wasn't here to admire. He was here to conquer. "Captain, all systems are operational," reported his tactical officer, a sharp-eyed Virelian with pale blue skin and dark, reflective eyes. "The infiltration teams are preparing to land on Earth's surface. Our scout ships are ready." Xerax nodded without taking his eyes off the planet. "Prepare the teams. I want full reports within the hour. There is no room for failure." His command had always been efficient. The Virelians were not an empire built on patience. They were swift, precise, and their military forces were second to none. Earth's primitive technology posed no real challenge. A few skirmishes, a quick show of force, and the planet's inhabitants would be begging for mercy. But as the first wave of alien shuttles descended toward Earth's atmosphere, Xerax allowed himself a brief moment of curiosity. Earth's history was filled with chaos, wars, disease, and political instability. Its people were divided, distracted. Surely they wouldn't put up much of a fight. Or so he thought. He never anticipated that one human would change everything. The Virelian scout ships descended through Earth's atmosphere, their sleek, dark silhouettes cutting through the clouds with ease. On the ground below, the world remained blissfully unaware of the impending invasion. Humanity's attention was absorbed in the mundane struggles of daily life: work, family, survival. The stars, though visible on clear nights, were far out of mind. They were merely distant dots in a vast and indifferent universe. The last thing anyone expected was for the sky to open up and bring them face to face with an alien empire. At the epicenter of this quiet chaos was Jack Mitchell, an ex-Marine, now a mechanic living in a sleepy town in Colorado. Jack's life had been ordinary, until the day everything changed. He spent his days fixing engines, repairing old cars, and working in a rundown garage. He was a man who preferred the simplicity of the world he knew, but the world had a way of throwing curveballs. He had learned it the hard way when he was in the service. On this particular morning, Jack was sitting in his usual spot at the corner diner, drinking his coffee and watching the news on a faded screen. The weather report was nothing out of the ordinary: a few storms in the mountains, some scattered showers. But then the feed cut out. Static crackled across the screen, and the diner's usual background hum faltered. Jack frowned and looked up, his instincts, honed over years of military service, immediately telling him something was wrong. The lights flickered, the coffee machine sputtered. Outside, the sky darkened, as though the sun had suddenly dimmed. A low rumble shook the ground beneath their feet, and the diners glanced around in confusion. "What the hell was that?" someone muttered. Jack's eyes narrowed as he stood and walked toward the window. He could see something in the distance, something moving in the sky, far too large and fast to be any aircraft he recognized. It wasn't just one ship. It was a whole fleet, descending on the town from above. His pulse quickened as the realization hit. These weren't normal aircraft. These were invaders. The first shuttle landed outside the town with a thud, kicking up dust and sending shockwaves through the streets. Its metallic surface gleamed with an otherworldly sheen as doors hissed open and alien soldiers in dark armor poured out, weapons raised, their eyes cold and indifferent. Jack didn't hesitate. He had seen enough to know how to react when the world was about to burn. "Everyone get down," he shouted, his voice carrying through the diner, snapping everyone into motion. "Get to cover." But as the invaders advanced, Jack didn't run. He stepped out into the street, his boots crunching on the gravel as he sized up the alien forces. These creatures were tall, their bodies sleek and muscular, their armor glinting like polished obsidian. They looked down at him with disdain, as though he were nothing more than an insect. Captain Xerax, watching from orbit, would have smirked if he could see Jack's defiant stance. He didn't know it yet, but this human, this one man, was about to make all the difference. The alien soldiers moved with precision, their boots thudding against the cracked pavement as they fanned out across the street. Jack stood his ground, though his heart raced in his chest. There was no hiding from this. No running. The air felt thick with tension, and the distant hum of alien technology was like an oppressive weight pressing down on the entire town. One of the soldiers, a towering figure with glowing blue eyes, raised a weapon that looked like nothing Jack had ever seen. It hummed with an energy that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. He knew that the weapon could vaporize him in an instant, but he wasn't afraid. Not anymore. His training had taught him to face overwhelming odds, to look into the face of death and act anyway. Human. The alien soldier's voice was cold, mechanical, almost robotic. "Surrender. You are vastly outmatched. This planet will be claimed." Jack didn't flinch. He wasn't interested in surrender. He wasn't about to let this alien come into his town, his home, and walk all over it. Not today. He muttered under his breath, a steely resolve settling over him. In the blink of an eye, Jack's hand shot to his belt, pulling out an old combat knife, a relic from his time in the service. The Virelian soldiers saw it as nothing more than a primitive tool, a human weakness, but it was all Jack had. It was a symbol of everything he had fought for, a reminder that no matter the odds, the heart of a soldier never gave up. He lunged forward, moving faster than the soldiers expected. The first alien soldier fired, but Jack ducked, rolling across the ground to the side of a nearby vehicle. His mind raced as he scanned the area, assessing his surroundings. There was no way he could defeat these creatures head-on. He was outmatched, outgunned. But that didn't matter. This was about survival, and he wasn't about to let his people fall without a fight. The soldiers were quick to react, positioning themselves around the street. Their energy weapons charged again, but Jack wasn't where they thought he was. He was already moving, using the environment to his advantage. He darted behind cover, sprinting from one position to the next, his mind calculating every move, every turn. The aliens were fast, but they didn't understand Earth's terrain. They didn't know how humans could fight when they had nowhere to run. Jack paused for a split second, crouched behind the wreckage of a nearby truck. He saw one of the alien soldiers about to open fire in his direction. He wasn't sure if it was instinct or something deeper, but he acted without thinking. Grabbing a loose piece of metal from the truck's frame, Jack hurled it at the soldier, striking it square in the chest. The alien staggered, momentarily disoriented. That moment was all Jack needed. He charged, a blur of motion, and tackled the alien soldier to the ground. His knife sank into the armor, and for the first time, the alien recoiled in pain. The soldier let out a screech of frustration, but Jack twisted the blade, driving it deeper. The creature gurgled, its eyes wide with shock. It fell silent, and Jack stood, breathing heavily. He had no time to savor the victory. The rest of the Varelians were closing in, their weapons aimed directly at him. But just as they were about to fire, a voice crackled through the air, amplified by a loudspeaker. "Hold your fire." Jack turned, his eyes narrowing as he saw the commanding officer of the Varelians descending from the shadows, his armored figure stepping into the open. This was no ordinary soldier. This was Captain Xerax, leader of the Varelian invasion force, and he was not impressed. "I did not expect resistance from one human," Xerax's voice echoed, full of issy arrogance. "But I can see now that Earth will not be so easily subdued." Jack didn't back down. He gritted his teeth, knowing that the fight was only just beginning. The Varelians had made one grave mistake. They underestimated humanity. And Jack Mitchell was about to make them pay for it. Captain Xerax's cold eyes locked onto Jack's, studying him with an expression that was part amusement, part contempt. "You are brave, human," Xerax said, his voice dripping with condescension. "But your defiance will be short-lived. This planet belongs to the Varelian Empire now." Jack didn't flinch, his grip tightening on the hilt of his knife as he sized up the alien commander. Xerax's towering form was clad in gleaming black armor, sleek and polished to perfection. His soldiers flanked him, their weapons trained on Jack, but there was something in their leader's gaze that told Jack this wasn't just about a physical fight. It was a battle of wills. "You really think you can take over Earth with threats and shiny toys?" Jack spat. His voice was hoarse, but resolute. "You've underestimated us from the start." Xerax chuckled, his voice like ice. "Underestimate? I do not underestimate you, human. I have merely come to realize that your species is not as ignorant as I once believed. But your resistance is futile. You are outclassed in every way." Jack glanced at the scattered debris of the town, the wreckage of buildings and vehicles torn apart by the initial alien assault. The people cowering behind whatever cover they could find, too afraid to move. They were at the mercy of these invaders. But Jack wasn't afraid. Not anymore. He wasn't going to let this alien monstrosity claim his home without a fight. "You might have better weapons, better ships, and a whole damn empire behind you," Jack said, his voice low and steady. "But you're forgetting one thing. We're humans. We fought for everything we have. You may have technology, but we have something you don't. Our will. And that's something you can't take from us." Xerax's eyes flickered with something akin to irritation, though he quickly masked it with a sneer. "Foolish sentiment," he muttered, raising a hand to signal his soldiers to advance. "Your defiance ends now." Just as the alien soldiers began to close in, something unexpected happened. A loud explosion rocked the street, sending a shockwave through the air. The ground trembled beneath them as a towering figure emerged from the smoke and dust. It was a massive armored vehicle, resembling a tank, but with far more advanced weaponry. It barreled down the street, crushing debris beneath its treads. Jack's eyes widened in surprise as the vehicle screeched to a halt just in time, its hatch opening. Dr. Emily Harris, one of the leading minds behind Earth's defense efforts, emerged from the cockpit. Her eyes were sharp, her face determined. "We've got you covered, Jack," she yelled, her voice crackling through a comlink. "Let's show these aliens what we're made of." Xerax's expression darkened as the human reinforcements poured into the street, their weapons aimed directly at his forces. Jack stood taller now, his heart pounding with renewed hope. The fight had just taken an unexpected turn. The humans weren't backing down. They weren't going to let their planet fall without a hell of a fight. Jack looked at Dr. Harris, then back at Xerax. "You've made a mistake, Xerax," he said, his voice steady. "This isn't just about me anymore. This is about all of us." Xerax sneered, but Jack could see the hesitation in his eyes. He might have underestimated humanity, but he was beginning to realize that underestimating Jack Mitchell was the biggest mistake of all. With the battle lines drawn and reinforcements on the ground, it was no longer just one man standing against the Varelians. It was humanity, united, ready to prove they could fight back. The battle escalated in a heartbeat. As the ground shook beneath them, Jack felt the rush of adrenaline surge through his veins. The alien soldiers hesitated for a split second, unsure of the sudden onslaught. Dr. Emily Harris's armored vehicle, a modified Earth-made tank equipped with repurposed alien tech, fired a barrage of energy blasts that cracked the air with a deafening roar. The first blast hit one of the Virelian soldiers square in the chest, and it crumpled to the ground, its body sizzling and smoking from the energy discharge. The remaining Varelians were quick to react, but their calm precision faltered as they were forced to contend with a level of resistance they hadn't anticipated. The human soldiers, many of them civilians who had never fired a weapon before today, fought with a ferocity that seemed to defy reason. They understood the stakes in ways the Varelians never could. "Weapons hot," shouted one of the local militia members from behind cover, his rifle aimed at the advancing Varelians. He fired, hitting another alien soldier in the leg. It fell, but it didn't stay down for long. Jack, still on the front lines, moved with a sense of purpose. He wasn't just acting on instinct anymore. He was thinking ahead, analyzing every move, every shot fired. It was like a symphony of chaos around him, but he was the conductor. He dove behind a nearby barricade, pulling out a small improvised explosive device from his jacket pocket. Without hesitation, he tossed it toward a cluster of alien soldiers, timing the throw perfectly. The explosion sent debris flying, and the soldiers were thrown off balance, disoriented. Jack took advantage of their momentary confusion. He darted out of cover, running full speed toward the nearest soldier. He tackled the Varelian to the ground, his hands grabbing its neck in a brutal hold. The alien struggled beneath him, its strength far superior to his own, but Jack wasn't trying to overpower it. He reached for the soldier's weapon, twisting it out of the alien's grasp, and fired. The soldier's head exploded in a burst of light and ash. For a moment, Jack stood there, breathing heavily, as the world around him descended into madness. His eyes scanned the area, landing on Dr. Harris, who was barking orders through a communicator. The tank's main cannon fired again, blasting through the side of an enemy transport ship, and the resulting explosion sent shockwaves through the air. But Jack could see the determination on her face. It was the same determination that was now spreading across every human fighter's face. The aliens were starting to realize something. They had underestimated humanity's ability to fight back, but now they were seeing something they couldn't comprehend: unity. Jack had inspired something in them, a spark of defiance that was rapidly turning into a roaring fire. It wasn't just about fighting for survival anymore. It was about taking back what was theirs. Xerax watched from his flagship, his expression shifting from smug confidence to a rare, uneasy tension. He knew his forces were being overwhelmed. They hadn't just underestimated the humans. They hadn't even begun to understand what they were up against. "Reinforcements," Xerax growled, his voice tight with frustration. "Send down the second wave." But even as more Virelian ships began descending from the skies, the human resistance had already begun to dig in. They were no longer the underdogs. They were the ones taking the fight to the invaders. And Jack Mitchell was at the center of it all. As the second wave of Virelian forces landed, the air grew thick with tension. New ships, larger and more formidable than the first, descended from the sky, their engines roaring like thunder. The ground trembled as they hit Earth's surface, sending ripples through the human ranks. Jack could feel the weight of the situation pressing on him. There was no turning back now. The Varelians had come to destroy, and they weren't backing down. But neither were the humans. Dr. Emily Harris's voice crackled through Jack's comlink, her tone urgent. "They've sent their heavy artillery. This is going to get worse before it gets better." Jack didn't need to be told. He had seen the massive ships land, their armored hulls gleaming in the sunlight. The Varelians weren't here to negotiate. They were here to crush any hope the humans had of fighting back. The new reinforcements included towering war machines, crawling behemoths with plasma cannons mounted on their backs, ready to rain down destruction. Jack's fingers tightened around his rifle as he surveyed the battlefield. The resistance had grown stronger since the first skirmish. Civilians had turned into fighters, some with weapons they barely understood, others with nothing more than courage and a fierce will to survive. It wasn't just Jack leading them anymore. It was everyone. From the makeshift command posts to the streets littered with debris, humanity was united. And despite the overwhelming power of the Varelian Empire, they were making the invaders bleed. "Form up," Jack shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. He raised his rifle, signaling to the others. "We hit them hard now, before they can deploy those machines." The humans surged forward, a sea of faces, determined and unyielding. Jack led the charge, his body moving on instinct as he fired upon the advancing Varelian soldiers. They returned fire, their energy blasts searing through the air. But humanity had learned quickly. They were no longer caught off guard. They used every trick in the book, taking cover, flanking, coordinating attacks. Jack glanced over at Emily, who was operating the heavy artillery from the tank. She had rigged a stolen Varelian plasma cannon to her vehicle, and it was now their most powerful weapon on the battlefield. As one of the Varelian behemoths lumbered toward them, Emily took aim, her finger steady on the trigger. The shot rang out, a burst of blue energy that tore through the air, colliding with the behemoth's flank. The machine groaned, a massive gash appearing in its side, exposing its vulnerable interior. The explosion that followed sent a shockwave that knocked several nearby Varelian soldiers off their feet. The humans roared in triumph. But Xerax wasn't about to let this resistance continue. From his flagship in orbit, he watched as his forces struggled. His gaze turned cold with rage. "This planet is mine, and I will not lose it to a pack of primitives," he muttered. His mind raced with possibilities. He would not be humiliated by these humans. He ordered his elite forces to land. These were the Varelian special operatives, soldiers trained in combat that made Earth's best look like amateurs. They were the last card Xerax had to play, and he knew that their arrival could tip the scales. The humans didn't know it yet, but their fight was about to become even more brutal. Jack could feel the shift in the air. The battle was intensifying. They had made the Varelians bleed, but it wasn't over. The real fight had just begun. The ground rumbled as the elite Varelian operatives descended in their personal combat dropships. These soldiers were unlike anything Jack had encountered before. Their black armor was adorned with intricate designs, and their weapons crackled with energy. They were not just soldiers, they were hunters, and they were coming for him. Jack saw them first, a dozen dark figures emerging from the smoke, moving with an eerie, almost predatory grace. These weren't the same alien soldiers he had fought earlier. The Varelian operatives didn't waste time on showmanship. They were all business, with a chilling efficiency that sent a wave of unease through Jack's chest. "Here they come," he muttered, tightening his grip on his rifle. Around him, the human fighters readied themselves, eyes wide with determination. Some had the same gut instinct that Jack did. The battle was changing. The Varelian operatives were a different breed. They moved with military precision, their weapons snapping into position as they advanced. Jack could already see the advantage they had in terms of training and coordination. If the humans weren't careful, this could be the turning point. Jack didn't have time to dwell on it. "Get ready," he shouted, his voice cutting through the rising panic. "We hold them off. No one backs down." The Varelian operatives were closing in fast, their jetpacks giving them an edge in mobility. They floated just above the ground, hovering with deadly accuracy, raining down laser fire on any human they saw. The energy blasts sliced through the barricades, vaporizing vehicles and structures in an instant. The humans scattered, ducking for cover, but Jack saw the way their eyes burned with defiance. This wasn't fear. This was resolve. One of the Virelian operatives spotted Jack, its glowing eyes locking onto him from across the street. Without hesitation, the alien soldier took aim. Jack dove behind an abandoned car just as a pulse of energy struck the pavement where he had been standing. The blast tore through the concrete, sending shards of rock flying. The humans were outgunned, but they weren't outmatched. From the corner of his eye, Jack saw Dr. Harris maneuvering the tank into position. She fired again, this time targeting one of the operatives' jetpacks. The shot was perfect. The Virelian soldier's flight path faltered as the propulsion system malfunctioned, sending the operative crashing to the ground in a heap of sparking metal. The humans cheered, but Jack knew this was just one small victory. The Virelian elite were far from defeated. Then, Jack saw them. The remaining operatives had split into smaller teams, moving with terrifying precision, surrounding the human forces. They had already begun taking out the stragglers, picking off the weaker fighters in a deadly game of cat and mouse. Jack's pulse quickened. He couldn't let them pick off his people one by one. "We need to hit them now," Jack barked, his voice steely with determination. "Everyone, focus on the command unit. Take them down before they get their footing." Emily, her eyes never leaving the battlefield, responded without hesitation. "On it," she shouted, swinging the tank around and taking aim at the lead Virelian commander. Jack's mind raced as he took cover behind the remnants of a building, planning his next move. The Virelians had just escalated the fight, but Jack wasn't backing down. He was going to make sure they paid for every inch they gained. The fate of Earth rested on the edge of a knife, and Jack Mitchell was prepared to drive it home. The streets of the once quiet town had become a war zone, the air thick with the smell of smoke and the crackle of energy weapons. Jack crouched behind what was left of a crumbled wall, his heart racing as he surveyed the chaos. The Virelian operatives were relentless, their movements swift and lethal as they systematically eliminated pockets of resistance. But the humans were fighting back, tooth and nail, with a courage that the aliens had never expected. Jack's eyes darted over the battlefield, tracking the movements of the remaining operatives. The tank that Dr. Harris was piloting had proven invaluable, but the odds were stacking higher by the minute. They needed a decisive blow. The Virelians were no longer fighting just to conquer. They were fighting to crush any hope of humanity's survival. Suddenly, the voice of Emily Harris blared through Jack's comlink. "Jack, we've got an opening. I've got the tank lined up to hit their command unit. We need you to cover me. Move fast." Jack's pulse spiked. This was it, the final chance. If they could take out the command unit, it would cripple the Virelian operation and throw their entire assault into disarray. He didn't hesitate. "On it," he shouted, already pushing himself to his feet. He checked his weapon, sprinting toward the center of the street, where the Virelian commanders were directing the assault. The operatives had spread out, but they weren't expecting him to make a run for it. Jack's legs carried him faster than he had ever run before, weaving through the ruins, his mind focused on one thing: the command center. Gunfire rang out around him, but Jack's focus never wavered. He was a blur, moving quickly, narrowly avoiding blasts that would have killed him in an instant. As he neared the command unit, Jack spotted their leader, Captain Xerax, standing near the armored entrance of a heavily fortified command ship, barking orders into his communicator. He had no idea what was coming. Jack's breath was ragged, his legs aching with every step, but he couldn't stop now. He threw himself to the side, diving into the shadow of a ruined building. He pulled out a small grenade from his belt, its sleek design an unfamiliar but necessary weapon. With a quick glance to make sure he was out of Xerax's sight, Jack pulled the pin and hurled it toward the command unit. The explosion was deafening. As the smoke and debris cleared, Jack charged forward, rifle in hand, his focus locked on Xerax. The Virelian captain had barely recovered from the blast when Jack was on him. He didn't hesitate. With a swift motion, he fired directly at the alien commander's chest. The Virelian armor absorbed some of the shot, but not enough. Xerax staggered back, stunned, his glowing blue eyes wide with disbelief. Before Xerax could react, Emily's voice rang through Jack's comlink again. "I'm in position. I'm taking the shot now." Jack didn't need to hear more. With one last desperate push, he tackled Xerax to the ground, pinning him as the Virelian leader struggled beneath him. He had just seconds. There was a blinding flash of light. Emily's plasma cannon tore through the air, crashing directly into the command ship's weak point. The explosion was massive. The entire ship erupted in a fiery bloom, sending shockwaves through the battlefield. Virelian soldiers scrambled, disoriented by the sudden destruction. The shockwave threw Jack and Xerax apart, but Jack was already on his feet, grabbing the Virelian's weapon. Xerax groaned, looking up at Jack with an expression of pure rage. You think this is over?" Jack stepped forward, his gaze cold. "It is now." With a final pull of the trigger, the Virelian captain fell silent. The remaining Virelians began to retreat, their morale shattered, their command structure destroyed. Humanity had won. Jack stood in the wreckage, the sounds of battle slowly fading as the remaining fighters cheered. Earth had fought back, not just for survival, but for the right to exist on their terms. Jack looked out over the field, where the human forces were tending to the wounded and taking stock of their victory. It wasn't the end of the war, but it was the beginning of Earth's fight to take back its future. And Jack Mitchell had just proven what humanity was capable of when pushed to the edge.